Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's special episode, we're joined by Spawn Wave Media to talk about Nintendo 64 games. As most of you are aware, Nintendo Switch Online has released its expansion pack, and with it comes some Nintendo 64 games. So in today's video, we're combining a list together of 10 Nintendo 64 games that need to be added to this service. A special shout out to Spawn Wave for joining me in today's episode, and if you're new here, consider checking out both his channel and mine. There's plenty of content for you to sift through. Now, let's talk Nintendo 64 games. We'll bounce back and forth. I'll get things kick-started with one of my favorites of all time. That's Pokemon Stadium. This game still does things that modern Pokemon games don't do. The animation quality, the attention to detail, the commentator are all iconic in my eyes. While people were screeching from the rooftops about how we needed to bring back Pokemon Snap, I was baffled because no one was talking about Pokemon Stadium. To me, this is one of the greatest Pokemon spin-offs we've seen. That's not including the plethora of Pokemon Stadium mini-games between this and its sequel, which would function perfectly in Nintendo Switch's online play category. But it's also the one-on-one battles, the assembling of teams during tournaments, and the ability to carry over progress in your Game Boy versions through the console. I thought this was revolutionary at its time. I had a blast with it as a kid. I still play it now. And if you're an eagle-eyed Mr. Matty Plays viewer, you'll know that front and center in the background, I've got this game lodged right in the Nintendo 64. It's because it's one that is near and dear to my heart. I still love the cover art here with Charizard and Blastoise. Again, iconic is the only way I describe this game. So my number one is without a doubt Pokemon Stadium.
Thinking back to the days of the 64, I mostly have memories of playing multiplayer games with a bunch of friends, kind of huddled around a CRT, but I picked out a couple of single-player games as well that I would like to see added. But I'm starting with my first game, and I'm taking the gimme. That's Goldeneye. Technically, Perfect Dark is the better game to add here. However, I already think that's kind of coming anyway, but Goldeneye would be cool just because of the history attached to it, where we were going to see, I guess, a remake of it on the Xbox 360. That fell through because apparently Nintendo or MGM was holding it up. But if Nintendo, Microsoft, and MGM can come together and get this on the service, I think it would be a really big announcement. It'd be really fun for a lot of people who remember it as fondly as a lot of people seem to. I don't think it's aged the best, but we're looking at pretty much all of these games through nostalgia goggles as it is.
Next up on my list, we've got Donkey Kong 64. Of course, we got to get one of Rare's best games. Donkey Kong's always doing the country games where it's side-scrolling. 64 took it 3D. You could play as Diddy Kong, Cranky Kong, so on and so forth. And honestly, it's the only Donkey Kong game I liked. As a kid, I was awful at this game. But I'm hoping that with something like good controller mapping, Donkey Kong 64 can be elevated to a new level in the public eye. I feel like the yellow cartridge speaks for itself. To me, that was just one of the more, again, I got to use the word iconic things about it. But Donkey Kong 64 was also a game that felt so open and free for its time. I remember all the sound effects it had to me. That was some strong nostalgic value. But I think this would be a perfect addition to the Nintendo Switch online library. Yeah, it doesn't have the multiplayer component that it seems like they're going for, so you can utilize online play, but I think there's still room for great single-player titles. We saw Legend of Zelda get added there, and to me, this is one of Rare's best games. It simply must be added to the library. Not only that, but we already saw that they got Banjo-Kazooie in the library, or it's upcoming rather. So why not get another great Rare title that really helped define the system? So I got to pick Donkey Kong 64 as my second title for the library.
The next game I picked is Mega Man 64. And to be honest, one of the big reasons I would like to see this game added to the online service is because I feel like Capcom's forgotten about Mega Man, but certainly Mega Man Legends. This is a series that had Legends, Legends 2, and then the Misadventures of Tron Bonne kind of thrown in there. And if they can take something like Mega Man Legends, which is basically Mega Man 64, drop it onto the service, I think it would give a new audience a look at Mega Man Legends, but the Mega Man series in general. And this was a different take on Mega Man. Rather than being a 2D platforming experience, this was a 3D adventure game, and it was a lot of fun. And on the 64, the load times were better, the audio was a bit worse, but I think it'll be really cool to see this added for the variety and to see how people respond to it now.
Next is a series, but it's a trio of games, so just hear me out. We've got the Cruis'n Series. And here you're seeing, of course, USA, you're seeing Exotica, and you're seeing Cruis'n World. Now, interestingly, Exotica was by Midway, but still, Cruis'n USA, to me, was a very important game growing up. In fact, they just released Cruis'n Blast on Nintendo Switch, which to me is crazy to think about that this series is still around. It also makes me feel kind of old. Cruis'n is a ridiculous arcade racer series. To me, what was most important about it is it was one of the few games I played with my dad. I don't play many games with my family. They were never into video games, so it was sort of just me on my own playing them. But the Cruis'n series was one that he actually joined me in. Not only that, but there was the steering wheel and the pedal attachment that we got for it, so it was this more interactive racer. But even on its own, Cruis'n USA, Cruis'n World, Cruis'n Exotica are, to me, staples in the N64 library. They're unappreciated hidden gems in what is, when you compare to the saturation of games nowadays, I'd say a pretty thin library, comparatively speaking. But I love the Cruis'n games, and if you haven't tried them out, hopefully Nintendo gives you a chance to do so. Yes, they're not the most complex racers, but when I played something like Mario Kart 64 and I saw people still enjoying that to this day, I certainly think there's room for people to enjoy a little bit more of a, if you will, niche racer like the Cruis'n series. So, gotta shout out my trifecta right here.
Next up, I have an instant classic, and that's Wave Race. And looking back on this one, we were blown away at the time by what the Nintendo 64 was able to do when we first saw Mario jump out of that pipe. But another game that I really look back on as one that blew me away was Wave Race, and believe it or not, it was because of the water in the game. See, back then we were used to just very flat, basic textures for the water, but when you jumped into this game and started racing around, the water had a serious effect on how you were navigating the course. You would be jumping all around with it, and it seemed like actual water. Visually, it was very impressive what they were able to do with it, but the game itself was a ton of fun, and racing around these different tracks with your friends, trying to beat them to the finish line, was a blast. And this is one that would certainly benefit from that online gameplay, and having Wave Race dropped on Nintendo Switch Online next to something like Mario Kart 64, also for the online play, would be a lot of fun to just have as selection.
Next up is probably a far-fetched request for Nintendo. I'm gonna try anyway. Spider-Man 64. Look, again, these colored cartridges, they just speak my language. Look at this. You got yellow, red. I love that stuff, man. It always worked so well on me as a kid. Little story time for your boy. Of course, there's nostalgic value in all these games, but I remember Spider-Man was the one relatable hero growing up, right? I'm from New York. He was a New York City hero. I thought he was cool. He was nimble, agile, skinny. I was like, yo, I love this guy. I hope they had a game for him. And my mom went to Toys R Us, and my first day after preschool, she has the Toys R Us bag there. She says, open it up, check it out. I got you something. And this game was sitting right there, man. And I'll always remember that moment for the rest of my days. And opening it up, this game, you know, there were times it was a little creepy. I think of the mission where you're saving Jonah Jameson from Scorpion. I think of the boss fight against Carnage and how creepy he is. The, of course, cutscenes and how they're delivered in a comic book style on the N64 version, I thought were iconic. The soundtrack, to me, still slaps. And while the combat is awful, especially in comparison to something like Insomniac Spider-Man, I still hope they find a way. I don't think they ever will. There's too many licenses it's tangled up with. But again, like, look at the cover art for this. It's literally just the side of a building in New York City with the streets below. Spider-Man isn't even on the actual cover art for the cartridge. So I imagine there's a ton of legal hoops that they would have to leap through to get this one done. But if they could do it, oh Lord, I would lose my mind. So I got to put that one on my list.
Next one I picked out is a little off the beaten path. There's not a lot of RPGs for the 64, so I decided to pick out Ogre Battle 64. I mean, It's either this or Quest 64, and I don't know a lot of people are calling for that one, but Ogre Battle 64 was closer to something like a Final Fantasy Tactics. Visually, it looks great with the sprite work and the pre-rendered backgrounds, but the story itself is very interesting, has branching paths, several different endings, and has kind of that classic tactical RPG gameplay. It was kind of overlooked back then because it was on a system that didn't really get a lot of RPGs. That was the PlayStation's thing. But I think there are a lot of people who missed this one, and it could be really cool to see it added to the online service for the Switch. And it would also add in that variety. Again, there's not a lot of RPGs to pick from, so I would prefer for them to grab something like Ogre Battle 64 over Quest 64 to put next to Paper Mario, which would be considered the other RPG.
All right, I have an honorable mention after this, but this is last on my list of 5 games I'm picking. And this one, I think, would benefit most from the controller remapping of anything else we've shouted out in this video. That's Army Men Sarge's Hero. So this was a third-person shooter where you would play as a toy soldier. It would play so much better if you were not on a Nintendo 64 controller. Shooters just didn't feel good on it, especially third-person shooters. But now with 2 Joy-Cons, some controller remapping, we can maybe get some magic going for Army Men Sarge's Hero. I loved this game growing up. I really, really, really appreciated it, and I wish that it got more love back when. But unfortunately, it never did, and it's something I would just love to go back to because there was this novelty of being able to explore the kitchen, for example. And it's just this standard household kitchen. But in Army Men Sarge's Hero, exploring that kitchen had a whole different meaning because you're this tiny little figure in this big wide world. I adored it. There are a couple of Army Men attempt spin-offs nowadays, like the Mean Greens, which you can play, but they're just dead games. So I would love to see them bring this back with the multiplayer and everything. I think it could actually do pretty well.
And for my last game is one of my all-time favorites when it comes to multiplayer on the Nintendo 64, and that's BattleTanx Global Assault. Let me know down in the comments if you remember playing BattleTanx, specifically though Global Assault, because this is where things went completely off the rails, and it was one of our favorites back then to play if we had a group of 4 together. Now, you could still play with computers, do like 2 like human players, then just drop a couple CPUs in there and just blow them up. But the idea here is, yes, you drive around in tanks and blow each other up. And there were different types of tanks that were very unique and interesting. Like, you could just be the large armor-clad Rhino that would just have this massive gun and explode everything in front of it. Or you could be the flippy tank, and you would legitimately do sidewinding moves all the way around with a little grappling gun. And it was a ton of fun to do that. And they did have a single player. It was okay. You mostly just go through and blow up big buildings. I mean, the 90s, it was a simpler time. But this is a game that I would jump to immediately if it was added. Get 3 other people together and just have a blast with the Nintendo Switch online. And those are my 5 games I would like Nintendo to add to their N64 lineup on that Switch online service. The interesting thing about this, though, considering it's a subscription service that you may have already signed up for, you end up finding games maybe that you missed out on back then, like an Ogre Battle, or ones that kind of rekindle that nostalgia, like a Wave Race. And while it's slow out of the gate now, if Nintendo does continue to build up with good games and that selection continues to grow, yeah, this could eventually become a pretty good service overall, just based on the legacy software from Nintendo.
Now, of course, honorable mention, I got to throw one out there that's sitting in my library that when I was sifting through my cartridges to see what I could show off for today's video that I could show all of you, of course, we got to bring it back to one of the greatest of all time, Smash Bros. Now, with the latest addition of Sora to the library and Smash Bros. Ultimate enjoying tremendous success, I don't think that we're going to see Smash Bros. Get added to the library for some time, but Smash 64 is one of my favorites. In fact, it's in my top 3 of all the Smash games that exist. I think that it was such a forward-thinking idea, and we can see that in full effect nowadays. I think a true celebration of that would be adding it to the library, and it would be doing the library a disservice if they never did that. So those are my 5 selections. That's Spawn Wave's 5 selections. And I hope all of you enjoyed this little collaboration here today. Thank you again to SpawnWave for joining me in this video. His channel will be linked in the description down below. Please do check it out. And a special shout out to him for joining up in this smaller channel that's aiming to grow more. With that, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what games you want to see be added to Nintendo Switch's online service in the expansion pack, whether it be Nintendo 64 games or something else. Fire away. I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts. And until next time, stay well. I'll talk with all of you soon. Peace out.